Hi, I'm Dr. Caroline Leaf, and welcome to my podcast, Cleaning Up the Mental Mess. Okay, today we're going to discuss something that is an inevitable part of life, and that is stress. That word that we hear so much of, that word that we say so often, I say it often, and generally when we're saying it or thinking about it, we're thinking about it in a negative context. We're thinking about it as something that is bad for us. You may have heard of good stress, you may have heard of something called eustress, but generally it's a statement, we'll make statements like, oh, I'm so stressed, I've got so much to do, I'm burnt out, I'm stressed, and it's generally, immediately, your body tenses up and it's relating to something that's negative. But actually, stress is the word for how our mind is responding to you being a human in life. I know that's a hugely broad statement and one you probably haven't heard distress defined as, but it is, because the moment you wake up in the morning and you open your eyes, you are taking in your environment and you are becoming consciously aware of your thoughts, of what happened maybe during your sleep the day before, what's happening today, tomorrow. Immediately all this awareness comes into play and we start responding to this plus our external environment. And that response is stress. And some of what we experience is good stuff and some of it's bad stuff, but it's all still stress. So therefore our response to just being alive is stress. Now we go through the course of the day, some of the stuff is good, some is bad, as we've said. And when you go to sleep at night, your mind doesn't switch off. Your mind is sorting out your brain and body and your mind. Your mind is sorting out your mind and your brain and your body, preparing you for the next day. And that is also working through, is also stress happening because it's alertness and being focused. So essentially, stress is a state we as humans are always in response to what is going on in our lives, internally and externally, our internal environments and our external environments, and over time how that wires into the brain and creates habits and things like that. So with that kind of view, we need to shift our perception of stress. And over the last few years, there's been some super interesting research done on stress, and how we view stress determines how it actually enters in our cells and changes the structure of our brain and our body and feeds back into our mind, keeping our mind messier or helping for us to switch into our wise mind that I talk about. Fortunately, this is something that we can learn to do. So we can learn to change our understanding of stress, which is why I'm doing the series of podcasts. And we can also learn how to recognize when we've shifted into misunderstanding stress and are possibly shifting over, and that then pushes us into toxic stress as opposed to a healthy stress, to recognize when that's happening. And then also, how can you train yourself to do this quickly and then make sure that if you're in those high states of threatening stress where it's toxic, that how do you get yourself back in? So the first part today is kind of an introduction into understanding how stress gets into your cells and what it does if we view it incorrectly or if we view it in the wrong way, and then what it does if we shift it into the right way. So I'm going to give you some kind of explanations and a little bit of science, not too much, but I think it's really important for you to understand this in all aspects. Then in the next part 2 and part 3, I'll go into more detail about what you can do to manage this with actual examples. Okay, to shift from the toxic to the positive stress. So first of all, with stress, just a couple of points. Chronic, unmanaged, toxic stress is going to lead to physical and mental or mind issues. That is an established fact. You've read that everywhere. That is what we've heard a lot of. There's a lot of science behind it. But the key here is, what have I actually said? I haven't said stress leads to an increased vulnerability to disease and to mind issues, mental health challenges. I didn't say stress leads to that. I said specifically chronic, unmanaged stress. So chronic means ongoing, like a tap that constantly drips. It's ongoing. It's not just an acute burst of stress, which is not bad for you. In the moment, your body responds, and then as you manage the stress, the stressor, then your body calms down. So it's a cycle. So acute stress can do a little bit of damage to your body in that moment, but your body will heal quickly and restore quickly. So acute stress is not the problem. Even if it's toxic stress, or if we manage it and we move in and out of that acute stress, our body will not stay in a state, or mind, brain, and body will not stay in a state of damage, okay? But if we stay in a state of chronic unmanaged stress, so where we constantly have this hovering stress going on, that nothing's being managed, we're just going from one thing into the next, and it's not being managed. We're staying in the chronic side, the toxic side of stress versus the healthy side of stress, and that accumulates. Eventually that leads to burnout and so on. That's where the problem comes in. That's the kind of things that's the kind of stress, toxic, chronic, unmanaged stress, that wears your body out. That enters into the cell and changes your cell. I'm going to talk in a bit more detail about what that does in a minute. Okay, so chronic unmanaged stress is directly linked to physical ill health and mental challenges. However, managed stress is actually good for you, and as I've been saying, and can be used as a source of positive and protective fuel, because that's what it's designed for. Stress can actually be used as positive and protective fuel. It's there. Without stress, you couldn't pay attention, you couldn't focus, you couldn't learn, you couldn't do anything. It gets you into a state where you can process the environment and respond to the environment. So we need stress, as I keep saying, but we've got to understand it differently. So whether stress is going to work for you or against you, in other words, when you actually use stress like it's designed to be used or structured to be used in your mind-brain-body connection, then what's going to happen is when you view stress as something positive, everything about the stress response will work in a way that supports you. The stress is on your side. So your mind-brain-body connection will get into the correct balanced stress state to help you do whatever it is that you are doing, or however you are, whatever you're thinking about, or whatever you are responding to in the environment. So just to give you an example quickly, let's say that you have a thought that grabs you and you wake up in the morning and that thought, you think of something and you find yourself going down that rabbit hole of rumination of this is going to happen, then that's going to happen, then that's going to, and it gets like really, it's going toxic. You have at that point shifted from healthy stress into toxic stress. So by pursuing the route of the dark hole down into all the things that can go wrong and ruminating over and over in a negative way, that's destructive. That shifts the scales and you move into the toxic stress. However, if you wake up in the morning and there's that thought and you say, okay, I recognize that this is an issue, or it comes up and it pops up and as it comes up, it's toxic. And you say, okay, I acknowledge that this is an issue. I feel this, it's doing this in my body, it's shifting my perspective in this way. I can feel myself wanting to say something negative and do something negative around this thought. And I can feel myself being drawn into ruminating in a negative way and thinking about all the possible things that can go wrong. I acknowledge that. Why am I doing that? And I ask myself, okay, why am I doing that? Why am I feeling like this? Why is this worrying me so much? And then maybe grab my notebook, notebook next to your bed. You can have a little neurocycle journal next to your bed and you can open it up and you can actually just start making notes. If you know how to Metacog, if you're doing my neurocycle app, you'll know how to do the Metacog. And you can just note down what those emotions were that you had in what that thought was in the middle. So in the middle, you can write what that thought was. So I'm holding up a notebook for those that are listening, and in the middle I've drawn a circle. And coming out of that, you can just put down what were the emotions. So I'm doing like 4 little lines growing out of that. What were the emotions? What did you feel in your mind? What did you feel in your body? What was your perspective? And what were you saying and doing? Could you feel yourself going down that rabbit hole of negative ruminations? And then you can why you ask yourself the question why, and you can then look back at the 4 signals, the emotions and so on, and then you can say, well, why am I feeling this? Why am I wanting to ruminate? What is the ruminating doing to me? Why do I feel this? How am I feeling this in my body? And you be aware, focus in as you ask yourself those why questions. Take the time to be in the moment to answer those questions. And then basically you can write that down. You're reflecting and you're writing that down. And then you can immediately catch that and say, okay, well, let me now recheck this. Let me see, how can I look at this differently? Yes, this is an issue, but this is what it's going to do if I carry on today. It's not constructive. How can I make this constructive? How can I turn this around? So that negative rumination, that this is going to be a problem, with these people, and this could happen, and this is going to happen, and you do this whole little exercise I've just described, and then you say to yourself, okay, well, that could be a problem, but I could do this now. I could send an email, describe my concerns about where I think this is going, and see what, and say how I'm understanding it, and then see what their response is. So that would be a recheck, and then you actually do the email, which would be an active reach. So what I've just described is a neurocycle for you when you wake up in the morning or at any time in the day when you find yourself starting to get worked up, feeling this tension in your body and starting to ruminate around something toxic. This little exercise will help you start becoming aware that you have moved into a threatening, your response is becoming what we call a threat response. You shifted into using stress in a toxic way, and that is doing damage to your body. So you can catch that, you can learn to catch that and do this kind of little exercise. So over the next 3 sessions, the rest of this one and the other 2 that I'm going to do on this, I will touch on these, give lots of little examples like this using the neurocycle. So if you want to know more about the neurocycle, for those of you, if you're just tuning into me for the first time, the neurocycle is an app that I've developed, which is how you use your mind to direct your mind and change the neuroplasticity of your brain, the health of your body, and basically rewire patterns in your brain. Okay, so essentially that's a little example of what I mean. But now, what I did there, let's quickly analyze what I did. I woke up, or I captured this thought, and I saw, okay, this is making me feel toxic stress. So the first thing that you need to do is look at your view. What is your view of this thought? This thought is, I'm seeing it as, my view is that this is toxic stress. And now I have years of indoctrination from just being alive in the current age and all the media that you've read about stress is bad for you. So immediately my mind goes to, oh gosh, I'm feeling stressed. I'm stressed. This is making me stressed. And this is bad. If I'm stressed, that's going to make me sick. And whatever, and you go into this cycle. Okay, it's like when you can't sleep and people tell you go to sleep or else you'll literally die kind of thing. It makes you so scared. You've heard me talk about this before. Worrying about sleep is worse than not sleeping. It's the same thing. Worrying about stress or the response that you're having to the stressor will put you into toxic stress. But if you view this differently and you say, okay, I'm feeling that response, but this is my mind-brain-body connection helping me to be alert enough to analyze this issue so that I can respond in the correct way and keep my body in a mind-brain-body connection in a healthy state. So the way you view the response that you're having to the stressor is going to shift your body in and out of toxic stress. Okay, so toxic stress is what we don't want. And if you think stress is bad for you, you're going to be handling everything from a toxic stress point of view. But now that I'm giving you this information and you say, oh, actually, stress is really good for me. And this response that I'm feeling doesn't mean that I'm going to get sick and whatever. It means that it's my body alerting me to actually respond to this in the correct way. And I can do a little neurocycle and apply these principles to help myself view this stress as healthy and it's working for me, and in that state, I can now try to solve this problem that I'm facing. That shift will make dramatic changes to your physiology. So what I'm going to do for the rest of this podcast is just talk a little bit about the neurophysiological changes that happen in us. And then we'll go into this, as I said, in more depth in the next one. So the reason this is so important is because when we shift out of healthy, normal stress, let's talk about normal versus toxic stress, because stress is normal. When we do this view shift that I've tried to just explain and demonstrate, it's important because stress is getting into every one of our cells, and rightfully it should, because our experiences that we are having are being processed by our mind into every cell of our brain and our body and into the gravitational fields of our mind. So life is becoming part of your mind-brain-body connection. So saying that stress gets under your skin or that stress gets into every single one of your cells is totally correct. It's the information from outside being absorbed by the mind, and the mind going into the state of there's information coming in or the information coming up, and I need to wire this in, and this is now something that I need to respond to. That is that stress response. So it does get into the cells. But if we don't view it correctly and we view stress, as I keep saying, as bad, then it goes in incorrectly. So let's have a look at what happens when when it shifts from healthy to toxic stress. I'm first going to tell you the toxic, and then I'm going to tell you the healthy. So the first thing is that if you know that ruminating example, let's take that ruminating example, and that thought comes up about, oh my gosh, you read an email. Let's say you read an email and this email says, oh my gosh, this terrible thing's going to happen now. This is driving me crazy. This is this. And you can, that rumination that's starting, if you don't catch it, you started off when you read the email in positive stress, even if you had a kind of, oh my gosh, reaction. But if you start allowing yourself to go down that rabbit hole, within milliseconds, you've shifted into toxic stress. And this is what's happening. First of all, the blood vessels around your heart are constricting. So there's less blood flowing to your brain and oxygen flowing to your brain, because blood carries oxygen, specifically to the front part of the brain, which becomes extremely active when you are in a conscious, intentional, focused state where you are reading this email and dealing with this issue, whatever, as the example, in the example that we're using. So you've got less blood flow, less oxygen, which means less nutrients, less functionality, brainwave activity changes. For example, the beta wave, which gets very active when we're very focused like this. The amplitude will increase of the wave, so the wave gets bigger. And even you get different frequency ranges. You can have a big wave in a low beta frequency wave, and when that if it's toxic, that can actually start creating some damage. So we can get that messaging from that wave energy, then sends a message to your immune system saying, hey, there's a problem here. So your immune system starts now sending out immune factors to start looking at this thought that's busy coming into your brain and preparing for a fight and to protect you. Then you're going to have this less oxygen and less blood flow, and this immune response is going to also send a message to your hormone system of your body, and now homocysteine, for example, is going to increase. So therefore inflammation starts to increase. So your body now is going into this is also related to the immune response, and now your body's gone into this protective mode, which is great for a short period of time, which is what happens in acute stress. So when you first read the email, so this is happening for a short time, but if this persists, if we stay in this state and you still you worrying about this being negative, this is not going to be, it's not going to be acute, it's not going to be a cycle, it's going to be a chronic state. You're going to stay in that state for a long period of time. And then this less oxygen and blood flow in the front of your brain means that you're not going to focus as clearly. You're not going to have as much wisdom. You can't see, you just don't have the cognitive fluency, and your intelligence can even start dropping off. So the decreased blood flow also creates an imbalance in your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic alerts us, this parasympathetic calms us down. We want them to be balanced. So now there's going to be a too much sympathetic activity across the entire nervous system. Okay, that allows a bunch of negative genetic and neurophysiological changes to happen that are going to impact your intellectual functioning. So when that message goes out now, not only is your cognitive fluency not working properly, you can't think straight, but also now your intelligence drops. Literally, your intelligence drops. Intelligence is fluid. We're as intelligent as we want to be. That's another whole podcast, which I need to do. But essentially, your intelligence to handle that situation in the moment starts dropping. So you also have another very interesting thing, is we in the hippocampus of our brain, which is like a C-shaped little structure, kind of where I'm pointing deep inside the brain, and it's very involved in processing incoming information. It's active when we process incoming information and when we recall existing memories. So it's all around sort of memory stuff, thoughts being recalled. There's a little genetic switch in there, a kind of cluster that switches on to basically protect us as information comes in. But that's if we're in stress. But if we're in toxic stress, it switches off. So that protective function is removed from the equation. So you're vulnerable. All of these, decreased blood flow, decreased oxygen, beta not flowing in the correct way, beta activity, the beta, the brain wave, this flow through your body that's affecting it's causing your cardiovascular system to not work like it should. The immune system response, the inflammation starting to changing different hormones in your body, increasing inflammation, all these things, that is happening in response to us shifting into toxic stress. And that's not good if it stays long term. It's not working for you. It's starting to work against you. You also get an increase in oxidative stress, which is when we have free radicals floating around our brain that start weakening our cells and making our cells more vulnerable. So they're more, when we've got that that happening, toxic stress with the immune response kind of almost backfiring, we get more vulnerable to diseases. So that's why it's easier to get colds and flus and that kind of thing. And we also, what we found in our research, and it's been found in a lot of people's research, specifically Dr. Lisa Epel and Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, is that your telomeres, which are the ends of chromosomes, which are directly linked to biological health, and they're in the DNA of your cells, basically are shortening. And when they shorten, and the enzyme that works with them called telomerase, when that telomerase gets less, the telomeres shorten, and that directly reduces the functionality of the cell and weakens your body and increases your biological age beyond your actual age. And that's not healthy. So basically, chronic unmanaged stress is going to age you. We often see that when people have been through chronic unmanaged stress, they look older. And you may go through phases where you look older, and then as you get your stress managed, you look younger again. So these are the things that can go wrong. Now, I'm going to end off this podcast on a positive note by saying that, however, if we shift our perspective to seeing stress as normal, it's how the mind is actually preparing us to respond. And even in scary situations, it's this incredible mind, brain, body function that we have to help us. Then the opposite happens. Then instead of the blood vessels around the heart constricting, they dilate. Now I've got more blood flow, more oxygen going to the front of my brain, which is fantastic. Now I can have improved cognitive fluency, improved ability to tune into the wise mind and the depths of the unconscious and hear and get guidance for, tune into our wisdom to be able to solve the problem, increase our intelligence, etc., help you to face and overcome the challenge. The increased blood flow also balances the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, so that alerting and calming down process. The genetic switch in the hippocampus will switch on, so that you've got this extra layer of protection to help you deal with the incoming stress. So you're going to have your immune system now knows what to do. It doesn't backfire on itself. Your whole HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary axis, which I'm going to talk about more in the next podcast, that functions differently. And then also we have decreased inflammation, decreased oxidative stress, so less free radicals, etc. And also our telomeres will be stronger. They'll lengthen as opposed to shorten, and that works hand in hand with the telomerase, which is the enzyme that helps them to do that. So then we're going to be increasing our health biologically, which then means that we're not going to age so quickly. So these are big things, and there's a lot more, but it gives you a broad idea of the impact. So it's really worthwhile starting to look at stress in a different way. And that's what this series is going to help you do. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to the next, to part 2 and part 3, where we really get into a little bit more about the HPA axis and what we can do to shift and change our understanding of stress. Thanks for joining me.